Welcome to the Love is the Cure Foundation podcast. I'm Alfonso Vega.
And I'm Lindell Vega.
Our goal at the Love is the Cure Foundation podcast is to have conversations that are valuable to families as they go through their own pediatric cancer journey. Today's conversation is with Ginny Lewis. Ginny is a senior art specialist at Boston Children's Hospital. I'm going to have Lindy do the rest of the intro.
Sure. Ginny has a long list of accomplishments. She holds a degree in English and Romance languages from Georgetown University. She holds a master's degree in child development, and she has over 20 years of experience working with children. She has been both a teacher and a child life specialist, and now she is focused on hospital-based writing and arts programs. But to Inigo, Ginny's more than those accomplishments. She was a conduit for his writing adventures. For all her wonderful attributes and contributions as an art specialist, Inigo saw her as someone that was kind and gentle with his desires to continue to tell stories. Once Inigo reacquired his abilities to write again, Ginny became a much larger part of our story. But even before that, she would stop by and give Inigo little gifts of a pack of pencils or notebooks, different stationery that he might appreciate. Inigo saw Ginny as a person that was interested in his creative outlets. This morphed into meetings over Zoom and in person with Inigo, discussing his writing and storyboards, leading to final book designs. Ginny and Inigo would work on developing his stories, with the wonderful possibilities of his books being published. Inigo had 2 books published during his 20-month cancer journey. His books are obviously special to us, but his last book, The Hospital Book, a book about giving advice to hospitalized kids, leaves us all with the understanding that his final desire was to help other children cope with their medical journeys. Ginny's attention and care to Inigo's creative needs and his desire to tell stories was very important to us. We appreciate these special programs offered at Boston Children's Hospital to help children think outside of their hospitalization. So once again, today's conversation is with Ginny Lewis. Ginny, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. That was such a kind introduction.
We introduced you. We would like to hear from you. So can you tell us a little bit about yourself and the work you do at Boston Children's Hospital?
Sure. That was just such a lovely introduction. I feel like I don't know how to put it better than that. I think I'm Ginny, and my role at Children's is really arts and writing based. I think, as you said, I'm really trying to help patients connect with their personhood, who they are away from treatment, and to access those creative outlets. My training is really writing based. I have a lot of training around narrative medicine and think about the application of narrative and writing in our context, which is already a niche, but then if you bring it into pediatrics, it's a niche within a niche. And I get really excited when patients like Inigo are genuinely in love with writing at their baseline, and then we can take it so many steps further. I do some other work that is really more visual arts based, but my goal is really to connect with patients and families and give them an opportunity to create an out-of-the-box project or to use writing and art in a way that will help them navigate treatment. And that can look different just depending on the patient, the family, and the circumstances.
So one of the things that we have tried to establish is the difference between specialists and therapists. And I think it's important, once again, in a previous conversation that we had with Lockie, I think you know him, we talked about the differences, and we think it's really interesting that specialists are not necessarily part of the medical team. Can you explain how that integrates?
It's a great question, and it comes up a lot. We're distinct from art therapy because many hospitals either have an artist in residency program where artists come in and they're trained within their modality. They really are specialized within a particular area, and then they bring that into a discrete residency where they might be doing wheelchair painting for 6 weeks, and then the residency ends. Other programs have a true art therapy program where they have clinicians who are trained in a more global way to use the arts and a range of modalities to work towards one targeted therapeutic goal. We as art specialists can work towards that goal in partnership with the clinical team. We don't tend to set that objective ourselves initially, but we do work in partnership with others towards discrete targets all the time. I think one example that comes to mind is I work on a lot of bereavement groups with parents and bereaved families. I'm not going to do that and I'm not going to set out that curriculum and everything that we're doing within that grief work without consulting first with the PAC team, with social work, with my closest colleague, Ellie, and really run it all by her to say, this is what I'm thinking. I think this will address the core needs of the group. Does this also align with your goals for this session? And we talk it out. I think an art therapist would be different in that they could determine all of that for themselves, because I'm really trained more as an artist first and am just coming into the healthcare context and applying that. I'm going to run everything by another clinician or bring it to the team first before taking that next step forward. So it's an important distinction to draw, and I hope that we do build an art therapy wing of our program eventually, but that hasn't been the model up until now.
I love that. It sounds like you have more freedom because you are not tied to a medical protocol or anything like that. And I find that super just interesting. And it must be freeing for you as a creative that you don't have to be tied to those sorts of things. So that's interesting.
That's very much the way that I feel. And it's the way that I've always worked with children too. I feel like as a teacher, as a child life specialist, as everything that I've been, I like to come into every new encounter and new relationship with more of a blank slate, saying like, what do you think you might like to create, or what is your wish, and then shaping whatever we do around them. I mean, there is a way within that to work towards a targeted or discrete goal, but to me it feels better to start from a more global place and then think about where it can also be addressing some more targeted therapeutic needs, but it really stays more in a place of like the child is in the driver's seat of whatever we happen to be working on or building together.
That's interesting. So you have experience as a child life specialist as well. So child life specialist, as we understand, is an understanding of helping a child through play therapy. So now you work in a different space of writing, for instance. How do those things differ?
That's a great question. I think with child life, there are different components to child life. There's really play, preparation, education. There can be procedural support, and things where you're really much more in the moment around a particular clinical procedure, something that's more invasive and more difficult.
We appreciate something that there's play therapy for child life. And then as we move into the writing programs that you offer, we know with Inigo, those were two different things, but they were also very similar in how you would integrate them for him. Now, of course, Inigo is a little bit older for, a lot of children are solely looking for play. But I think something that we saw in you is that you do tend to work in populations where kids are already understanding either the process of writing or they're beginning to understand how they can tell their stories through writing. And so I just wanted to know what the differences or similarities are. And maybe I just kind of stole that a little bit from you, but just, to go from play therapy to a different writing specialty and how that's different for especially a child that is aging out of that child play.
Well, it's an interesting question, too, because along with Inigo aging out of it, I think he was really someone who was quite sophisticated in some of his thinking, some of his ideas. He just had such an incredible creative imagination to begin with. I mean, I think both really do have a play-based component at their core. I've always tried to keep any writing and literacy-based work still playful and light. I mean, I think that's something where with patients unlike Inigo who might be more intimidated by the writing process, when I walk into a room and say, would you like to do some writing or some storytelling? They'll be like, oh, I'm a terrible student. Oh, that sounds awful. They connect it with school. They connect it with the mechanics of writing. They connect, the sense of failure to it if they've had some academic setbacks. And I'm always working to try to get around that, to say that doesn't have to be what writing is. Everybody has a story to share. We're not here to run spell check on you or to fault find in any way. This is really just about putting down your story. And, you know, my unspoken agenda is always like, please don't get caught up in that. Please don't, you know, feel good about yourself. Know that everybody has a few really great stories to share. So let's think about what one is that you have that you would really feel good about committing to paper. It doesn't have to be this daunting act. And we can keep it playful, we can keep it light. It doesn't have to, you know, the play can look different depending on the age of the patient, the sophistication level, and also just the project that they have in mind.
That sounds really kind. I wish I had teachers like that. the way you explain that. Hold on. Teachers are fantastic. I didn't mean like like that as a negative. I love teachers. A long time ago when I was a student, I would have loved for a teacher to explain it like you just did.
Just take the pressure off. You know, kids feel so much freer and you know, liberated to tell their stories, or what makes them laugh, what they think is funny, or what stories they like to hear. So, yeah. So, just, you know, hearing about your unique, all your unique trainings. Tell us a little bit about how your journey from teaching evolved into your current professional endeavors.
Sure. So my background as a teacher was kind of a winding path because I found particular approaches that I really liked and then shied away from. And I found myself really being drawn to Reggio Emilia-inspired schools and Reggio Emilia-inspired pedagogy, which is a really distinct approach to teaching and to the way that you work with children. I really fell in love with that. I felt like there was a lot of beauty in that. It's a very project-based approach. There's just a lot of respect for the child and the individual's process in it. So I went back for a master's in child development just because I felt like it was good practice as I was really developing as a Reggio teacher. I felt like I wanted more education, more foundations. And I think I was towards the end of my master's program when I took an elective in pediatric psychology just for pleasure. And I happened to have a professor who was a real advocate for child life services. And she, during that portion of the course where she focused on child life, she had a really thoughtful way of talking about it and just how different it can look in different contexts, different applications of the field. I was in an applied child development program, which is a very like ground level kind of thinking, really looking at just direct applications of practice. There's theoretical child development, and then there's really applied thinking about what this can look like in flow. And I loved what she showed about what child life can look like in different hospital contexts. I was very moved by a project that she shared about a videographer working at Seattle Children's who had done something called the Cat Project, where he brought in this big tenting and these large sheets to project hundreds of images that were crowdsourced of people's cats when there was a patient who was feeling like they missed their cat so much and were in a bone marrow transplant unit, could not reconnect with their pet, just wanted so much to access cats. And just seeing the imagery of the child interacting with the cat really moved me. And I thought, you know, I feel like child life might be something I want to explore. This just looks like it could be this interesting blend of different things that I've done in the past. And different personal experiences that I've had. Like, I'd be more comfortable probably than others in a medical setting. I want to try this. So I took a child life internship in pediatric hematology oncology. And that was how I got started with child life. It was a smaller clinic. It was not Boston Children's. It was a smaller children's hospital across town. I loved it. I had a great connection with my mentors, and it was just a really good fit. Oncology is already a world unto itself, but with a really small program, you just get to know the territory very quickly. You get to know those families in a different way. There's a lot of recursive relationship building, a lot that felt like it was analogous to teaching. Like, I love just cultivating a relationship with folks over time, getting to know them in that deeper way. And so I did my first real writing-based intervention in November of that year. And the writing intervention that I designed was kind of just something that I developed on the fly because there was a patient who was really struggling with food restrictions, and his nurses were just beside themselves because they couldn't get him to stop watching the Food Network and Paula Deen and like watching these turduckens being made. And they're like, please just give him anything to get his mind going in a different direction. He just wants to talk about nothing but food. And I started from a place of like, well, great. Why don't we start by making a menu? Like if that's where his mind is going already, why don't we start there and then see if he may want to go somewhere else? I'd also just observed him having some really lackluster exchanges with the hospital tutor. I saw him through an antechamber window just pretend to fall asleep like this as she walked in. And as a teacher, that just made my heart break. It's like, that's a missed opportunity because I know that kid has a lot of creative firepower. I had just been told a lot about him. And so that was where I started from. And he wanted to make a book with me. And what I first offered him was very, almost middle school level when I think back on it. It was really offering a blank book, offering some nice markers, cutting, pasting, and doing some lamination to make it look, I don't know, maybe Kinko's-esque in the end. And I thought like, I haven't done this before. This is kind of nice. And when I handed it to him, he was so kind. You could just see like he was trying not to show it, but his face was falling. And I said, what's wrong? You can tell me. And he was just striving to be so polite. But he finally, he just was like, I thought we were going to make a real book. I thought this was going to be real, like with an ISBN number and a true dust jacket. And I really thought it was going to look a little different than this. And he's like, I'm so sorry. And I said, no, please don't apologize. I haven't done that before. I don't know about the publishing world or self-publishing. If you're willing to be patient with me, let's figure this out together. And he was in for a long course of treatment. So it was really starting from that place of like, I don't know how to do this either, but let's figure it out together. If you're willing to be patient with me, we'll just sort of like throw some stuff at the wall and see what works. And we definitely went through a bunch of different iterations of what a book could look like before we got it right. And he was so pleased with it in the end. And he started spontaneously giving readings to anybody who would walk past his door, environmental services. He would just be shouting to anybody who was going past. There's somebody going past with the cafeteria tray, like, I want to read to you from my book right now. And he tacked a sign to his door that he made with the hole in the wall folks that said author in big letters. And he just wanted to read to everyone. He read to his team every day when they'd come in. He asked to hear passages from his book when he was going through radiation as part of his coping. And he ended up using it as this incredible coping tool as he progressed towards the end of life. And it was a really unexpected turn in his course of treatment. And it was also the first really deep relationship I built in the hospital setting. And so it was really moving and also very educational for me to see the way that someone can use a book as a tool like that as they're approaching end of life. For him, his dream was to write 100 pages. He said, if I can make 100 pages and have a formal published book, like I feel like I've done it. And that was really the big thing for him. And he loved the idea that his book would go on to be read by other children, that he'd have an audience. And when he did pass, it was very hard for me. I was very early into practice, and I went to his wake and his service, and one of the things that I was really not prepared for was his mother had staged just this incredible series of different tables and stages of things that he'd done, creative things he'd done over time. He had done a lot with the Hole in the Wall program. They were very important to him. There were just, these huge tables of all the things he'd done with Hole in the Wall over the years, and infomercials that he'd shot with someone who was not lucky, and duct tape wallets. And the final thing that he had wanted right next to the casket was a table set up with his books and his author bio photo. And he wanted that to really be it. And it was really hard for me to see that, especially just not having been prepared for the fact that it would be there. I was really stunned by it and really moved by it. I think it is important that that was the first big intervention that I did, because it really drove home, like, this really will matter to certain children. Like, it will just make an experience for them, and, take this seriously, because clearly this mattered so much to him. And just to know that his parents and his family ended up using the book in a different way too really carried meaning for me. I think a lot of these books end up having a life outside of the hospital, which has been, just a revelation for me in terms of creative thinking. Like, where can these books live and go? How can they be resources? How can they be teaching tools? What can these books do for patients and families? And so he really planted a seed for both of us that I don't think either of us were expecting. But after working with him so closely, my mentor turned to me and really said, can you think about scaling that out? Like, that just worked so well for him. Like, what would that look like for different developmental levels? What would that look like if it was hospital-wide? What if that was open to siblings? What if it was open to parents? And we started from there, and I ended up focusing the rest of my master's work on writing-based hospital work, looking at what programs already existed, what was out there, and then thinking about what could be improved upon, what other directions it could take. And I've kind of been down that rabbit hole ever since. I practiced as a specialist. I continued to practice as a specialist for a while, working in different settings and switching hats. So I was simultaneously teaching and running writing programming there, because I created a full writing program. And it was a lot to balance all those things. So when I came to children's, I really shifted into, I'm just going to focus on the writing-based work. I'm just going to be part of this dedicated arts team, which only exists of one other person who is now my husband. But it was really exciting to join a program where there was some programming already in place, because I was sort of a free radical in my last context. It was like there were external programs offering services in, but not too many other team members.
Wow.
We hear so many echoes of our story in that story. We hadn't heard that one yet from Ginny. That's really, really special.
Yeah, it gave me goosebumps.
Yeah.
I could just feel all that emotion.
Yeah. I mean, we've been there. Yeah. So to hear that in another child, and we're sure there's so many more out there that have that very similar story. I'd love to hear the genesis of that journey for you, and definitely what it led to for us with Inigo, and how special it was to have a very similar connection with you. Ginny, I want to talk about, I'm sure you deal with a lot of children that are, that have difficulties in verbal communication. And with Inigo in particular, we saw you through the first year of Inigo's treatment, but we didn't really get to build a relationship during that particular time. Inigo was still working back into communication, but you still made a point to connect with him. Mm-hmm. I think Lockie, I think Rachel, I think other people put Inigo's case on your radar. And I think you were aware that at that time, there wasn't a lot that you were going to be able to work on with him. But you started with very small gestures in connection, in a relationship. Can you talk a little bit about that process? And what I mean by that is whether we were coming back into the hospital facility for neutropenia, or we were, so we would end up on the 6th floor, or we would end up on a different floor instead of our normal neuroscience floor. Ginny would show up and she would gift Inigo with little things. As we said in the introduction, she would bring him pencils,
markers, and books, blank books to illustrate.
Blank comic books that he could fill in. And so he wasn't at his full strength with being able to write his stories yet. But you understood, or at least you were hoping that would come one day. And so you started with this breadcrumb journey. Once again, I don't want to take anything from you, but what is your thought process behind doing that for patients? Kind of
following them,
setting the groundwork for what may come.
I love the term, like the breadcrumb trail. I think that's kind of what I'm hoping for most of the time. I think at baseline with any patient, I always want to make them aware of the fact that I'm always available. I'm always there Monday through Friday, ready to form a relationship if and when they're ready. With Inigo, I did receive a referral for him at the same time that Lockie did, when he was early into treatment, when he had really just fallen into posterior fossa syndrome, and when the team was starting to talk about what could some interesting creative supports for him look like. And I remember having that conversation with Lockie and Rachel, and I don't remember who relayed it first, if it may have even been one of you directly, or if it may have come through Rachel, but what was communicated was, like, Inigo is a child who is just so connected to art and writing and books, and this, what you typically offer, would be right up his alley. And right now it's probably going to be too frustrating, because there's so much there in terms of the thought and just how much he would probably like to create and what he can access right now. And it may come, but he's in a different phase right now. And so my thought was really like, I step back because that's the message that I'm getting, but I just keep checking in to see if there's ever a way that that I can reach back, if it becomes appropriate at a different stage, that we can pick that back up. I think about that with other children too, just because they have waves when they're just feeling really crummy. The bone marrow transplant unit is one area where I often do that, where I know that many of them follow a pretty predictable path in terms of the low that they hit, in terms of feeling crummy, even if they have high creative energy. And then it's just, I'll pop my head and just say, I'm here if you want to talk today, even if you're not up for doing something. Let's connect, we can talk about books. And I had the same thought with Inigo, and I also really wanted to just acknowledge that I knew he was an artist, I knew he was a writer and a real thinker and a Calvin and Hobbes enthusiast, and just that he was connected to some really interesting stuff, and that he would want to make use of some of those materials at some point. Like he would get the difference between the Crayola markers and the really nice art markers, and how much you can do with those. And I just thought these will be a resource at some point, but I want to keep just circling around. Also selfishly, because I knew you guys were all so cool, and I knew what an incredible kid he was. I was hearing about it every night at the supper table from Lockie, and just said, like, he sounds like he would just be, part of my tribe, but, we're not in a place where we can really connect around the project I think we would both want to connect around. So it's just kind of, sticking my head in the door sometimes just to give a wave. It can be that little, but then when someone's ready, they can reach back and we go from there.
I just love that you did that. It made a lot of sense for him. Mm-hmm. He was very emotionally intelligent, and he struggled with the awareness of where his journey was going. He was clearly aware of his situation. Yeah. I think most kids are, if you take the time to really talk to them and get to know them. By you doing it the way that you did, it built a trust in him where he looked at you as a person that he could trust in his journey.
Yeah, there was no pressure.
Yeah,
it was just
no pressure. You were there. I think so many times pediatric cancer patients feel pressured. Mm-hmm. And it may not be by the system. It just may be by their cancer journey. A lot is expected of them. And a lot of what is expected of them is to commiserate with someone else feeling terrible about your situation. And I think that's such a weird thing that we do in society. We put pressure on these kids to see that we feel bad for them. And you never did that with the little creative things that you would bring him. It brought him to a different elevated plane. And I think exactly what, such a good point about the crayon, is that he would have felt placated to if you would have brought a box of Crayola crayons to him. It's that classic, you're in the hospital and we're going to bring you a blanket because somebody's donated a blanket, or we're going to bring you this because... And Inigo was the type of child that don't just bring me stuff because there is stuff. There's a lot of stuff out there. Don't do that. Like, I don't need things. And I thought it was really interesting that he never felt like that with you, because the things that you brought him were thoughtful, they were purposeful. You would bring him really nice notebooks. You would bring him these really nice
markers, journals.
Yeah, art markers. And you're right. He was someone that looked at that and was like, oh, and he would spend time looking at who made these markers, where they made. I think you brought him some Italian markers or something that
if he could watercolor with them.
Yeah, that were like really nice. And we were like, oh, those are really nice markers. And he was like, I know, look at where it's made, and he would look at the back. So I think that's so important. What you're saying is that, and going back to your initial story with that patient that started this journey for you, when he's looking at the Kinko style book and he's expecting something different, I think it's so cool that you have built something where you understand, and you're hopefully helping other people understand too, that children need to be shown respect. And I think that's a big part of it. I think, Inigo would absolutely agree with that patient. I want to see a book with an ISBN number on the back. I want it to have a description. I want it to have, I want it to be binded. I want it to have, a different font on the spine versus the cover. He cared about that. And Ginny, it's wonderful that you see those details and you understand that children desire that. I think that's really important. Do you have a psych major? I mean, there's a lot that goes into that process. Lindy and I are the type of people that are all for participation trophies. Like, kids should get everything that they can get to enable them to feel important in this world because they are important. And I love that you did that, Ginny. I love that you gave those things that were thoughtful to Inigo, and I'm sure you do that for every patient. That must be exhausting, figuring out each of their niches, but I love that you do that.
I don't give things to every patient, honestly. I mean, it really depends on the situation, and I really hear you when you just share Inigo's experiences when he would have people come into the room and, give blankets or this or that. And that's something that I really have resisted in the hospital context. I feel like there can be a lot of just throwing objects at people instead of coming in to build a relationship and just a creative space. I find it upsetting. I also feel like it's very much a part of our culture. I mean, we are a culture of stuff in America. I think, to answer your question about whether I'm a psych major or not, I think some of that just comes from the child development training, but a lot of it also came through the, being trained within the Reggio Emilia pedagogy also, which is a teaching style that comes out of Northern Italy and is really centered around great respect for the child and really trying to assess where each child is as an individual learner, as an individual just unto themselves, and really thinking about each child within the context of a classroom, who they are in the classroom, who they are away from the classroom. I always have the same thinking in a hospital context about who a child is away from treatment. And I feel like sometimes giving the nice markers can honestly be like a signal almost of just trying to say, like, this is like a line back to who you are away from here. Like, I know you know how to access paint. I know you love biking. I know that those things are important to you. And I think sometimes the gesture can be a really important form of acknowledgement, and that they just want to be spoken to at their level and not in some sort of a pandering way, which I think does come up with a number of children confronting big illnesses.
I think we have to do a better job as a society. I think as a system, we see the system working well with making kids feel important. At least we saw that. We saw that with our nurses. We saw that with our therapy teams. We saw that with our specialists. I could go back to Lockie. Lockie was like that with Inigo. He made Inigo feel important, his likes and all that sort of stuff. And I love that you were completely different than those other systems, but still gave that respect of meeting Inigo where he was. Mm-hmm. And it enabled him to go, yeah, I am important. and I think I think kids need to feel that, especially in these hospital settings, especially knowing where their journeys are going.
Yeah, I think it also did a lot for his personal motivation just to push through every day. And I know in Inigo's case, he really didn't have much of a chance to maybe overthink or feel the loss of all that he had lost because of posterior fossa syndrome and, his journey with medulloblastoma. But I think when your services came in, they came in at the right time. It was just motivation there when he needed it. And he was able to look forward to each day that he had the energy to making stories, to making, drawings if he could use his hands at that point. And it just gave him a way forward. So I know that for other kids, maybe even older kids, they're reaching a point in their lives where they're thinking, well, like, what can I do now? You know, and this just comes along at as a source of new motivation for them, where they don't necessarily need to dwell on those types of thoughts, you know.
Yeah, Ginny, on that point that Lindy's making, you have patients that are older. You have, 14, 15, 16, 17-year-old kids. How is it that you serve them differently? Because at that point, I understand what you're saying, that the core, the genesis or the core, whatever it is, it's still based in child life. But there is different. A 16-year-old in their processes, their thinking processes, their awareness of their disease. Does that differ for you when you're working with those kids?
In some ways. I mean, I think my biggest connection with teens has actually been around our behavioral health population and working within the psych unit. I do a lot of group work with teens who are confronting mental health challenges and some behavior challenges. I certainly work with teens and young adults in other areas of the hospital as well. I think I don't want like the larger percentage of the work really is with behavioral health teens at the moment, so I don't want that to muddy anything that I'm saying. But I feel like when I'm working with teens, I'm often trying to start it more from a place of conversation. It often starts off that way with younger patients as well, but sometimes it can really be developing that solid relationship first, taking any pressure off the writing process, saying like, let me just jot down notes for you so that you have a list of your ideas about something that you might like to compose, and going from there, because sometimes there is, again, that just threatening thought of like, well, this is connected to school, or this feels like college essay territory, and I don't want that, and I don't want to write some big memoir about my cancer right now. And I think there can just be a little more academic pressure in the background, or just whiffs of school in some ways. So I just try to keep it light and as a conversation, or even say, do you want to start from a place of like painting about the experience, and then move from there if they want to progress towards targeted writing work. I'm always open to taking it in another direction and just thinking about what modality is going to be most useful to whoever I'm working with. With a lot of teens, there can be, I do feel like a number of them really request visual art more often, because there can be a lot of nonverbal things coming up, particularly for behavioral health. I think having visual metaphors is really powerful. Doing more painting-based or photography-based work can be a really great fit for some of those kids. But as with anything, I'm really just starting from a place of trying to develop trust in a relationship coming into those sessions. And some teens really will like let you in right away as soon as you walk into the room, and others, they're a little prickly, or just need more of a slow start. And to see that you're a safe person, you're not a teacher, you're not a doctor, you're really just there to be an ally in the process. And I think once they get that and they've vetted you, it's sort of like, okay, we can do something.
I remember being a teen, and I'm glad that there are people like you, Ginny, because it's like you're saying, I look at the hospital, and it's an environment, children's hospital, where you have a lot of Disney happen on the walls. You walk into the lobby, and you see a lot of like just super colorful stuff, like a lot of and you're right, what you do has a little whiff of deeper than a bunch of Disney happened on the wall somewhere, And I can see as a teen going, wait a second, like what world am I in? I'm at a children's hospital, but then, I would also like to not be at a Disney children's hospital or something, And I don't mean to just use that name, but
more mature.
Yeah. You want a more mature level of, no, I want people to understand me and where I'm at, and yeah,
I'm not a little kid anymore.
Yeah. That's got to be a tough road to hoe for you sometimes, to understand the child in particular, and what they would want or what they would desire.
So you mentioned earlier that you also assist parents and siblings of hospitalized patients with writing. How have you seen that impact them?
I think the The greatest amount of the work I've done with families and siblings in the last few years has really been around grief-based work, and it's just been interesting to have that develop as a part of my practice, because I did end-of-life work, I've done legacy pieces, I've done some work in this territory in the past, but doing very focused bereavement groups in partnership with Social Work Impact has been just fascinating to me, just in terms of talking about the grieving process and thinking about where writing and art can come into it in this different way. I think our hospital had, they'd received feedback over the years that just families felt like there weren't quite enough options, that what existed was really wonderful, but they wanted to build out what already existed to give people more of a range in terms of ways to process after a loss. And so our social work team Impact developed this really beautiful menu of different offerings, like grief yoga, grief music therapy, a grief photo narrative and journaling group, grief gardening. It was really like a multiplicity of options, just thinking about how everyone copes differently and wants to try different things in terms of thinking about different stages of grief, because the Hope Group, I think, remains open to folks for a very long time. It's really like the hospital connects with you shortly afterwards, and then it's offered in an ongoing way. And it had been more of a traditional talk therapy group originally, and I think it was just interesting to come in when Ellie and Marcia Joslow started the program and think about, like, what are some other programming options that could be out there? How could this be braided to the grief work? Like, where can we come into this in an appropriate way? I've really loved working on that programming and doing the grief-based work. It's been such an interesting application of practice. It's like this blend of photography and narrative medicine, and I think sort of the traditional workshop model for a narrative medicine group, but then blending in photos and video of people's children. And it's really, it's been very moving to be a part of, and it's really helpful to hear from families who've participated that they feel like it kind of changes the dial in this different way. It's really like, oh, this is a tool for me. Like, I didn't know that writing was something I'd ever feel connected to, but I actually feel like this is letting me access this different corner of what I'm going through, and this was actually really useful. And that's all that I want to hear at the end of the day from anyone I work with. It's really like, if that was actually helpful for you or useful, or you feel like something changed in a positive way, like that's why I show up every day. And to hear that from so many of the families has been very moving and makes me want to just continue on with it. It's unexplored territory for me professionally, so I just feel like I'm moving more in that direction, and just learning more about what bereavement work can look like, and trying to think about where else it can go.
There is a definite peace found in that. And I've found it in maybe different modalities. I'm not much of a writer, but I do find that in art, and especially like working on the project that we did for Children's, the wall there, with Inigo's work, that satisfied something in me that I didn't know I needed.
Mm.
So,
yeah, absolutely. And you know, this is a good place to pause and talk about how Ginny was an advocate for us being able to do that artwork at Children. So for anybody watching that doesn't know what we're talking about, we have videos linked on our channel, but Ginny reached out to us. Inigo had passed away already. I believe we had already had Inigo's celebration of life, and Ginny reached out to us just to see if we would be interested in using Inigo's work to create a living wall of art sort of thing at Children's Hospital. And we were so excited to be given that possibility. And so Ginny worked hard with Lindy and myself and the other team members at Children's, Elizabeth and I forgot the very tall gentleman, Eldred, yes, on creating that space. And it ended up being very therapeutic for us to use Inigo's work in such a way. So as you walk down one of the hallways at Children's Hospital, you will see all of Inigo's work in a very Wes Anderson style of display. And the idea that we wanted was to create a feeling of a child's wallpaper going down the hallway. And so all of Inigo's artwork is displayed as a wallpaper. And then there are 4 boxes, and inside each of those boxes, Lindy and I created 2 dioramas and 2 presentation boxes. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
Or are they 3 boxes?
There's 4.
4 boxes.
Yeah.
Why am I forgetting?
2 dioramas
Yeah.
and 2 display boxes
Yeah.
with his items.
With his items. And so we found it therapeutic for us, but we also thought just a little bit about that hallway. We've been going in and out of Boston Children's Hospital since Inigo was born. This was before Inigo was diagnosed with cancer. And so we have been in that facility an innumerable amount of times. And there was something about that hallway that was never exciting for him. It felt very...
Well, it was kind of empty.
It was kind of empty. There is some work there. I don't want to diminish that. But it was something that was daunting for Inigo because he knew we were there for something that he didn't want to be a part of. Mm-hmm. As the years went on and we would walk him down that hallway, especially as he became a cancer patient and we were dealing with cancer treatments, that hallway became more familiar than we wanted it to be. But it also became a place where Inigo would look and say, this should look different. It's the main hallway where you end up at the elevator bay. And so to be given the opportunity to do something about something that our child had communicated to us about once upon a time was a surprise, but also very exciting. And to be given that possibility was therapeutic for us. So as Lindy says, she may not be a writer, she may not express herself that way, but to be given the opportunity by you, Ginny, and your team and Boston Children's Hospital to create an experience of therapy for us as a couple, to remember Inigo, and then his work to speak to other children, that it doesn't matter that other people may see your work as the work of a child. Your work is important at whatever level that work is. A child creating a stick figure comic series can be the most amazing stick figure comic series of all time. So if children can be enabled to feel that way and to understand that they are important, their importance is not relative. Their importance is absolute. And people, we need to really observe that and take hold of that and make it a part of every child's life out there in the world, sick or not. So we were given this opportunity by Ginny. We created a hallway. It's we have had friends and family go and see it. We've had nurses report back to us what they see. I think it was Ginny or Lockie said, man, I just wish I could set up a little camera so that you guys see how people interact with that space, because it's very exciting. That's something that was provided for us, and clearly something born out of how you view the importance of people in your space, whether it's the children that you are working with or the family units. And so we absolutely appreciate that you continue to serve us even after Inigo had passed away, and it still served that purpose of making sure that his work was still valued, and important. So
yeah, enabled us to express our love for him.
Yep, absolutely. So what we try to do here with these conversations is to highlight to parents the things that they are going to come across that they didn't know about, that they didn't know existed, that they should be aware about. Ginny, are the systems making it aware enough to patients that you are available to them?
I think it's a journey. We've done a lot of workshops for nurses in the last several years, and I will say the number of times that a veteran nurse will come to one of those workshops and say, like, this is fabulous. I love these services. I love that these supports are available to kids and families, but I've been here for 30 years and I didn't know that existed. It makes me crumple a little bit. I just think like we're really under the radar. At the same time, there are just two of us, so it's, we're already stretched pretty thin, and so we want to be out there. I think that word is really starting to get out there more and more in the last year, especially with the art studio that started on the top floor of the hospital. It's a transparent space, and I think people really can come and see children in this way. It's really like making children's play and creative work a little more visible. It just happens to be in a spot where a lot of people come through to use the rooftop space. I think that the art program is coming into people's consciousness in a different way. I think we could do better in terms of making sure that everyone knows creative supports are available at any stage of the journey. And we've talked about, what that could look like in terms of the best way to advertise, the best way to make kids and parents aware. But I think we just try to get in there as early as we can with any referral, because we think earlier in the process is so much better just for planting the seed, so that people also know that it's a resource going forward, even if the timing is not quite right or they're feeling too unwell, that they can access our services anytime.
Okay, so for parents out there listening to us, even if you're not at Boston Children's, if you're at other hospitals around the country, ask if they have art specialists as part of their program. Ask if they have writing specialists as part of their program. For parents that had a child with posterior fossa syndrome, we understand that there are no metrics to say that Ginny's writing work helps. However, we will say as parents that it absolutely helped our child. Mm-hmm. And as Inigo, we did push him with his blessing. We did push him to continue to not give up on these sorts of creative outlets. And we saw a clear benefit in how he continued to speed up his processing. He continued to be able to communicate better, to get his stories out. I know Lindy mentioned in one of our previous episodes about coming across Inigo's creative writing after he had passed away. And what we were realizing in his creative writing that he was doing before he was diagnosed was, here he was as a cancer patient recalling word for word his stories that he had written previous.
Yeah.
And so that's a clear lesson to us with a child with posterior fossa syndrome that, number one, your children, they present differently now with posterior fossa syndrome, but cognitively they are 100% there. Their processing speed is different now. Their communication speed is different, but do not disrespect their cognitive abilities, because it's still there. You just need to be patient and allow it to come out of them. So wherever you may be around the country, use these tools, these art specialist tools, to help you as a parent, help your child to feel more fulfilled, to feel more important in their setting, and to make them understand that their importance is not in the illness that they have, but it's in who they are. Children that walk with importance in this world, their value is not in their illness, it's in who they are. So we want to make sure that we highlight that. So, Ginny, I know we've run out of time with you, but if you would allow me, I would like to tell one story about you.
Please.
And Inigo loved camping, and we would take him camping. And so camping obviously looked different once Inigo was diagnosed with cancer, and our journeys were much different. When we get to camp, he couldn't just jump on his bike and take off while dad is setting up a tent, or mom is doing something else, or popping up the tent on the truck, or whatever the case may be. And so we're heading up to camp one day, and we live in central Massachusetts, and we're going up to Vermont. And on our way, we stop to take a rest break. And at this particular gas station, they had these UG characters. So
like puzzles.
Yeah, 3D
animal
puzzles. So for anybody that doesn't know, UG is a company out of New Zealand, EUGY. Look them up. We're big fans of them. But they are cardboard cutout puzzles, essentially. And as I found these in this particular gas station, there was a fox, an owl, and a moose.
Yeah.
And I said, perfect. We're going camping for 3 days. And for each day, he can do one of these. Now, this was really important to us because Inigo was still had ataxia in his hands. He couldn't really do a lot with his fingers, this sort of thing. And we thought, this is perfect. I said he can sit at the picnic table while Lindy and I are doing things, and he can work at these things. And we thought it was a great physical therapy thing, but we all occupational therapy. We also just thought it would be fun for him, and he would love this. And sure enough, the thing is with Inigo is you're just not sure because he's at that stage where he's aging out of certain things, but he still loves Legos, and so I thought, this will be okay. Like, he's still going to be into this. He's not going to feel placated to. And so we get to camp, and I said, I got you stuff. And we showed it to him. And sure enough, he right away, he wanted to pick one, and he did it. And each day at camp, he would do that. So fast forward about 4 months, and it's in the fall now. And Lindy and Inigo had conversations because Inigo was upset that Yuji did not offer a Bigfoot. And for all of you out there watching us that don't know our journey, Inigo is a huge Sasquatch, Bigfoot, Yeti aficionado. His favorite movie of all time is Harry and the Hendersons. That's just him. His comic books, a lot of them center around a Bigfoot. It's a big part of who he was. And so we'll fast forward. We're in the fall, and he says, Dad, I'm going to write a letter to Bigfoot. He can write now.
Yuji.
Oh, excuse me. I'm going to write a big letter to Yuji, and I want you to send it to them. I said, okay. I said, that sounds good. And so he sits down and he writes a letter to Yuji. And the letter is talking about how he would appreciate it if they worked on a Bigfoot. And he finished his letter. He drew a picture on the outside, and then he said, I would like you to take a picture of me to send with the letter. And I said, okay, sure enough. And Inigo was well aware that he was a cancer patient. And so he thought, if we make it known to them that I have cancer, maybe they will do this. And I said, okay.
Twist their arm.
He understands manipulation.
Yeah.
Okay, we're at that stage in life. And so I sure enough, I took a picture of him, and Lindy and I worked really hard for the next couple of months trying to find an appropriate mailing address. And our biggest fear is that this letter would end up in a mailroom of a big company somewhere, and it would never get to the right person. Nobody would see it. And we didn't want to disappoint Inigo, of course. Fast forward again about 3 months, and Inigo ends up in the hospital because his tumors are growing, and he is now having tumors form on his spine. And so he needs radiation on those tumors because he is having difficulty walking. And as he goes through radiation, we get towards the end, and radiation has gone very well, and he's doing really good. He's back to doing his therapy. He's walking well. And it was a Sabbath afternoon, and he says, he had just gotten out of the shower. Yeah, it was a Saturday evening. I think he was watching the Bruins, and he says, Dad, I have a question for you. I said, yeah. Did you ever send that letter to Yuji? Oh. Inigo, well, we couldn't find a mailing room. We couldn't find the right place. We didn't have a contact. We haven't sent it. He says, okay, that's fine. He says, but I have an idea. And sure, we're all ears. What's the idea? Ginny is the writing specialist around here. And we said, yeah. He said, I would like for you to ask Ginny on Monday if she can come to the room. We said, okay. and he says, I go, well, what is this about? He says, well, I think Ginny, with the power of Boston Children's Hospital behind her, can get Yuji to make a Bigfoot. And I think she would do a much better job at communicating what I want to say in a letter than I did. And I said, geez, this kid is smart. I said, yes, of course, we will talk to Ginny. And so Monday came, and Ginny gets summoned, I guess, by the nurses or someone. And Ginny shows up, and she's got her laptop with her, and she sits down, and she said, Inigo, I heard you have something that you want to talk to me about. And sure enough, Inigo explains it all. And Ginny sits there right in front of him and starts to write out this email, just 1,000 miles a minute, just getting it out there. And she's like, okay, I have something to work on. I'll be back. Well, Ginny showed up the next day, and she said, we have a response from Yuji. And well, the correspondence went from there, and it was super, super exciting. But 3 weeks before Inigo passed away, Yuji sent him the very first 2 prototypes of their Sasquatch. And what a fantastic story that we have. His Yuji then became available, interesting enough, about 5 months later or 4 months later on the weekend of his celebration of life. So what a wonderful story for us that we have that. But more importantly, Ginny, it was something that you grabbed by the horns and you just didn't let it go. You allowed his thoughts to be important about that, and you enabled him to do something that he had wanted to do for a long time.
He had very specific directives about how this Sasquatch should look, right?
Yes. Yeah. And I just find it interesting that Inigo, of all the people that he had worked with, he looked at you and your specialty and your spirit of calm that you always had with him, and he said, Ginny's the one. So somehow he knew more than Lindy and I knew, because we didn't know that you would be the catalyst or the conduit to reach this company and to do what you did. I think more and more we have become aware of your powers.
I don't know that it's mine. I appreciate that he was thinking about the power of the letterhead too, just being like, well, you've got the emblem behind you. Maybe this will push it onto someone's desk. I mean, I loved that project, especially because it was so much, that conversation was so much a part of like what I especially appreciated about Inigo. I mean, it was so thoughtful and sweet and nuanced and intensely specific in places. I mean, I love that specificity of detail. And the way that he talked about Sasquatch was just beautiful. It was like, well, I want him to be depicted in this way where he's not menacing. Like, he's a gentle giant and he's a protector of the forest. Like, he should not have this face that scares anyone. He also needs like a really round, firm bum, because he's got to protect the whole forest, and like there's a lot to hold him up. So he needs to have a really good round butt. And I'm just all of these really wonderful details, and then reasons behind the details. I mean, it's the way a writer thinks. It's really like you're choosing this, and this is why. I mean, he was just so precise and logical and sweet and thoughtful, and it all came into that note, I think. I loved that note, and in communicating with Yuji, there was always something that was just like slightly lost in translation, which I thought was really charming about our exchanges. But I have to tell you, the morning after we connected and sent the note, when I got the email back from them, I mean, my heart just like blossomed when I opened my inbox, and there was this screenshot of like a giant Sasquatch butt. It was like a designer spec, and it was just basically the plumber's crack of the back of the Yeti. And despite the language barrier, I think the first line was something to the effect of, "Tell him we will call it Inigo's Gorge." It's like, oh, wow.
It was great.
But they wanted to show,
that.
Despite the language barrier, that they took it seriously. They were going to get going. And it was a really lovely correspondence, even with some of our language barriers. And Chang, the designer from Yuji, I mean, we so appreciate him and wish we could shake his hand in person. Yes. But they moved on that request, and I had done a little bit, secondhand communication just to make sure that they understood, because of some of the language barriers, that, the timing was a little up in the air. We weren't really sure if they might be able to do this in in a quicker way if that was reasonable or not. And they were just so kind. And that's one of the things I really love about my job, that I sometimes get to do these very out of the box requests. And that sometimes when you reach out to a toy company or a public figure and just say, there's this child who has this really special wish. I know you're busy, but can you make this happen? It feels so good when people reach back, and it's not in a celebrity or attention-seeking way. It's just like, yes, we would love to do that. I've had a number of people I've encountered like that who, just really charm me forever by saying like, yes, we definitely want to help with that. It makes me feel very good about my fellow humans sometimes. There are some people who won't reach back, but there are some people who will, and who will say like, this is so important. We're like clearing our desks. This is the priority right now. We'll make this happen for this child. And, it also makes me really respect the folks at the Make-A-Wish Foundation, because I think that's kind of the ethos behind that too. And, just gathering together to make something special happen for someone who really deserves it.
Absolutely. So if any of you out there have bought the Bigfoot, the UG Sasquatch, there's a shamrock on its butt. And that is an ode to Inigo from Boston. That's what we took it as. I don't see why else it would be there. So it makes a lot of sense to us. And it's just one of those things that, yeah, absolutely. What a wonderful connection that you made there. And the fact that Inigo knew that you would be the person to talk to, he respected what you did in your communication, your writing, and he thought, you know what? Ginny's the person that's going to write this in a way that's important. Yes, she knows the letterhead of Boston Children's Hospital. This is all going to work out well. And we thank you for the backdoor communications as well, because, yeah, he was able to do it before he passed away. And it's just the smile on his face and the joy of one final accomplishment meant a lot to him. So, Ginny, we want to thank you so much for being with us today. Once again, we want to let parents know out there, look for your art specialist at your hospital or wherever clinics you may be at. There's a lot of importance that you can give to your child through these specialties that are specifically set up there to give your child another voice, active distraction from what may be going on in their medical journey. And it also allows them to understand that their importance is not defined in the illness that they may be dealing with. It is defined in who they are and how they communicate, their creative endeavors, or the unfound creativity that they are yearning for. Mm-hmm. And so we once again, what we try to do here at the foundation is to highlight things that you want to look for in your journey. And so if you haven't yet heard about art specialties, writing therapies that may be out there, please look into that in your space and wherever you may be. So, Ginny Lewis, thank you for being with us. We appreciate you very much. You are a very special person to us, and we wish you continued success in your journey of helping kids be the best kids ever. So thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate you guys so much, and thank you for sharing Inigo with me. I mean, it has been just such a blessing to work with you all.
Awesome. We'll talk to you soon, Ginny.
Okay.
That wraps up our show for today. Thank you for being part of the conversation. We hope that by listening to our discussions, you can find valuable information. If you believe that the Love is the Cure Foundation podcast could benefit someone you know, please share our content and support our cause.
Our desire at the Love is the Cure Foundation is to help children and families as they navigate a pediatric brain tumor diagnosis. Our experience is with Inigo's brain cancer diagnosis. Some of our conversations may be specific to brain cancer and the residual effects. That being said, through these conversations, we hope to impart practical information that may be useful to a family that may need it as they journey with their child through a pediatric cancer diagnosis. brain cancer, or otherwise.
We are a nonprofit charitable organization. If you would like to donate to help the Love is the Cure Foundation, please go to our website, loveisthecurefoundation.org, where you can donate and also read about our story and the outreach that we are doing at the foundation.
Visit our website to find the link if you're interested in purchasing Love is the Cure shirts. We're thrilled about our new design, which includes many Inigo elements. Thank you to everyone who has already bought a shirt. Every contribution matters as we strive to support our pediatric cancer community.
Thanks for checking us out. Go love on someone. We all need it.